Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, it's Jessa. Welcome back for another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. So glad you're here. I think sex is important. I think our relationships are important. I think our sense of pleasure and connection with our partner or partners matters. That's why I'm here. Today's episode is another personal story. And if you have been listening to the podcast, you know I do these occasionally. I actually think they're really impactful to be able to hear from regular people who have faced challenges and adversity in their sex life or their relationship life, and who are willing to come share that story with you so that maybe you feel less alone. Maybe you get a different kind of sense of hope. Maybe you hear something that could help you transform something. That would be my wish in bringing the personal stories to you. And if you're a person that is even considering sharing your story, I would love to hear from you. I mean, I'm looking for more people to talk about the kinds of things they've been through. Again, because I think that's important. I do this anonymously. Just use a first name. Doesn't have to be your real one. No identifying information. But if you share your story, you could make a difference. So you can get in touch with me through the bettersexpodcast.com website, or you can email me. Just let me know you're interested and we can talk about details. Today's interview is with a woman named Harriet, who was molested as a kid and went through a journey around compulsive eating, around fear of men, painful sex, all these things that she was going through, until she read a transformative book that reframed trauma as unfinished tribal initiation. I mean, you probably don't even know what to make of that as you're listening, but she will describe it and talk about it. And it's really an inspiring story of how much healing and work she's done as an adult and totally closed the door on this as a trauma and has become a gift with which she can make a difference in the world. So, hope you enjoyed the show. The Better Sex Podcast is brought to you by the Sex Without Stress online course. It's a course for couples to escape the cycle of disappointment, avoidance, and pressure in your sex life. So if you're in a pretty good relationship, there's a lot of love and goodwill, but sex is your struggle, this could be for you. You work in the privacy of your own home and at your own pace to create a sex life you can both look forward to. If you want to learn more, go to sexwithoutstress.com/program. Harriet, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your story.
No worries, Jessa. I'm glad to be here.
So, where do you want to start with your story? Take us back to where it's appropriate to.
Okay.
launch.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I think it's important to share it because it really is a story of transforming something that was basically ruining my life into a source of strength and a way to help other people.
Great.
So, so it all started when I was 9 and I was molested. And I actually blocked it out. I blocked it out till I was about 15.
Oh.
But one thing I will say is that when I did remember it, I remember thinking, oh, this happens to loads of people. I wasn't quite as aware as, we are these days. I'm 47. So in those days, people weren't talking about these things so much, but I was aware that it did happen.
Okay, so you knew you were not alone in this.
Yes, but
yeah.
I remember thinking, oh, well, you have to just get on with it, and it's no big deal. But actually, it was a really big deal for me. But the thing is that it wasn't. If you lined people up, with trauma, You line people up, and at one end of the line, you've got me. And it wasn't a particularly violent or awful assault, I will say that.
Okay.
And right at the other end, you've got somebody, you know, horrific things that we all know about.
Right.
That I think what I was thinking in my head before I really got into my healing was that my pain wasn't as bad as theirs. And what I realized is that actually, when I read Peter Levine's book, Healing Trauma, what he said is that there's no sort of comparison going on here. Trauma is where you are overwhelmed and feel like you can't escape. And that was an incredible liberation for me, really.
So your tendency might have been to minimize what happened to you, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Was there anything in particular, you don't have to share this, but that brought those memories back if you had buried that for 6 years?
Well, yes, actually, my dad was, and by the way, this was nobody in my family. The person who molested me was a neighbour. Okay. But my dad trained social workers, and what he was starting to make videos. This was the middle of the 80s when I was about 15, and he wanted me to play a teenage girl who was being abused. And
oh, wow.
So there was this sort of with my back to the camera thing. And I think that might have brought it back. But do you know what? I can't actually remember that much. But in the meantime, sort of in my teenage years, I was downplaying it, but I was developing compulsive eating and self-hatred and desperation to have a boyfriend, but never having one, and being scared of men, really. But I didn't realize it. So I went through this and being quite miserable and developing the eating issues. And now looking back, I can see that the eating issues were a way to deal with this. I look at it as a protection mechanism. By eating, I could divert myself from dealing with the trauma of the sexual assault, really. And also, in my primitive mind, the primitive mind knows that the bigger we are, the safer we are. That's what it's anyway. And so I think I know that was what was going on with my eating at the time.
But no awareness of that in the moment at the time that you were compulsively eating.
No, absolutely none.
Were you wondering where it was coming from, or did it just seem totally normal to you?
I just thought I love sugar and chocolate, and I'm an awful person. And when you're a teenager, you tend to think that everything's because you're broken, and well, it was for me anyway. I didn't have a great teenage years. I was too busy being hard on myself.
Right.
So then I went, I did well at school. I went to college. And when I was 22, this is the next stage in the story, I got this job doing voluntary work in it was a homeless hostel for young men. And one of them got arrested for molesting a child. And all of a sudden, it was like the curtain was drawn back. Oh. And I saw how messed up I'd been, and I had to leave that job like overnight because I felt awful. I remember it was really terrible at the time.
Was that a time when you started to realize that, wait, this had a really big impact on me? I can't minimize the trauma?
Absolutely. Yeah. It was then. And I think looking back, because I was 22, I was a bit older, and I was able to see. You can't heal what you can't see. But when you're a teenager, I was too immature, and I didn't have any resources to deal with it. But obviously I was able to see it at that age. And then I remember, so I left the job, and I remember going, and I tried to go on antidepressants, but they didn't work for me. I felt like a zombie, and I just got into, just get on with life. And I sort of got back. I don't really remember. It's a bit dimly in my mind, because that's 25 years ago now.
Right.
And then I became a teacher, and then I started that part of my life. And again, it went back to, that did mess me up, but better just get on with things. And the compulsive eating carried on, the self-hatred carried on. But all the time I was like, I'm not really worth enough to try and look at this. Oh, I do remember I did go for some counselling at the time. And I remember, and it was specialist counselling for adult survivors of childhood abuse.
Oh, okay.
And I do remember this lady who counselled me, something she said that stayed with me. She said, I'd just been talking about the event, the original event, and she said to me, "You look like 9, you look like a little girl." And she said, "Time to take the girl out of the dock." And I remember thinking, yes, but it didn't, talking about it didn't, maybe I was too young, I don't know, I was in my early 20s, but it didn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
As you'll hear, I needed a different reframe rather than just, the traditional counselling as it was at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
So then I was into the rest of my 20s. I was a teacher, struggled with that. Then early 30s, I met my husband and we got married. And interesting enough, to talk about the fear of men. He was the first man I felt safe with. And I think that's why I married him and had kids with him. I had this big urge in my early 30s. I thought, I really, really want to have a child. And I think there's something in me said, this is more important than your fear of men.
Yeah.
And I almost think I thought it was like something in me was like, I will draw towards me somebody who is safe.
Right.
He ultimately wasn't the right man for me. But I think, well, aren't I lucky that I was so messed up and I was so scared and I was in such a fear response. I still managed to meet somebody and have my 2 boys. I've got two boys.
Right. So maybe he was the right man for then, or for that.
He was the right man for then. Yeah. If I'd waited till, because I didn't really start to sort myself out till my 40s, and I had kids in my 30s rather than my 40s, really. So,
was there any impact on your sexuality or sexual expression from what had happened to you?
So I basically, it was, sex always hurt. It always hurt. And I never really got any pleasure out of it. It was a bit better with my husband, but it was like so many women's experience of sex at the time for me was, well, it's okay, we'll just get on with it. Like we say, lie back and think of England.
Oh,
yeah. So then I had my boys, like my mid-30s, and then I turned 40, and I remember thinking, I'm sick of being a compulsive eater and I'm sick of my excess weight, and I really wanted to get on top of my compulsive eating, and I had some hypnotherapy and I lost a bit of weight with that, but it didn't really get rid of the compulsive eating. And then I started doing a lot of self-hypnosis. I started reading books and doing an awful lot of journaling. And it was then I came across this book, and this book, I know it's a bit of a cliche to say this book changed my life, but this book really did change my life.
Wow.
And it's called The Language of Emotions by Carla McLaren. Okay. And it's like an encyclopedia, a translation of emotions, because I'd always had these oceanic, out of control emotions like shame and rage and everything. And what she says in it, she says, well, here's the positive function in your rage, and here's a positive function of shame, but that kind of shame isn't useful. And it was like, wow. And I didn't feel so ashamed of my emotions, I think, with that.
Wow. I don't know that book, but I'm going to put that in the show notes. Maybe it'll change someone else's life too.
Oh, really? It has blown me away. But anyway, what there was this whole chapter in this book about trauma, and she came up. I'll put it in a nutshell in just a couple of minutes. A summary of what she says in the book. She says that trauma partially mimics tribal initiation. Okay, so I know that's a bit of a mouthful, so I'll explain what I mean. So if you imagine in tribal societies, young lads, say they're about 12, 13, and they have an initiation to being a man. And I think also that there are initiation ceremonies for girls, but I've never managed to find anything on that.
Okay. What
she says in this book, that somebody had done some research and come up with 3 stages of this initiation. So the first stage is removal from the tribe.
Yeah.
So if you've got an Aborigine boy going on a walkabout in the bush, the tribe say, right, you're going to go and do this. You're going to go off on your own. Second stage is the ordeal. And then the third stage, if he passes his initiation, so he probably has to do some quite scary things in the bush, but he's watched over by members of the tribe. The third stage is return to the tribe and then honouring for having gone through this experience, and then he's given extra responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So what Carla McLaren said was that in childhood trauma, you go through part of this, but it's unfinished. So the removal from the tribe in the trauma parallel metaphor, if you see what I mean, is maybe the child who is taken to a secret place to be abused, or it doesn't have to be sexual abuse. It could be bullying, Sometimes that can happen away from other people. Okay. And then the ordeal is the ordeal. Doesn't need any explanation. But there is no return. There is no third stage, no return to society where people say, oh, you've been through this horrible experience. You are so brave for having done this. We are going to honour you. And look, this can make you resilient for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so she says that so many people who've been through trauma, they're sort of stuck. And there isn't because of, well, in my case, I didn't even know. So I blocked it out.
Right.
And the neighbour who molested me, it was two events, and there weren't any more after that. He was trying to lure me with sweets, which I think is a bit ironic. And I said no. And then he left me alone. So, but I didn't even know anything had happened in order to tell anyone. So there was no stage 3 for me.
Well, part of what else is missing there is the being watched over by the tribe too, right? Like, the boy in the bush has people looking out for him, even if he doesn't know it. And there's an awareness held by the community. And of course, with abuse, either there's lack of awareness or there's no protection.
Yeah.
Frequently. So,
exactly. So, but then the other thing she said in this, if there's ever anything that has removed a lot of my guilt and shame, it is the next thing I'm going to tell you. In these tribal initiations, if the child does not pass the initiation, they go and they do it again. And she says that what happens in the psyche is a similar process, that when people haven't reached their stage 3, they just go back and unconsciously they look for other difficult, challenging events in order to reach stage 3. So for me, it was I chose a career teaching secondary school kids, trying to deal with boys. And also I'd gone in my teenage years, I'd also put myself in quite abusive situations with boys. Right. And I felt so guilty about that later on as an adult. And I read this and I thought, I was just trying to reach stage 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's so common, right? I hear this all the time with clients who had some sort of abuse or trauma, and then they end up in relationships that are re-traumatizing.
Yeah. And they're just trying to reach stage 3. So when I read all this, I'm like, this is amazing. So instead of needing a time machine to go back and escape my neighbour when I was 9, I realised that my task was clear, and it's to move myself to stage 3. So it'd be great if we had a tribe who would do it, but we have to do it ourselves, you see.
Okay.
So from then, so that was 2012, I read this. So since then, every challenge I've had, I've been like, well, this is a way you can get to stage 3, Harriet. So I trained in eating psychology. I gave up sugar. So by the time I started doing my training in eating psychology, I had dealt with a lot of my compulsive eating myself. Then I started my podcast in 2017. So, and all this is very, very stage 3. This interview is an extremely stage 3 activity. So,
put it out in the world and be recognized and honored and have it benefit someone else, right?
Yeah. And what I've realized is that while it's easy to see the world as being tribeless and there's less community feeling than we would have had when we were in tribes, actually there are an awful lot of small tribes that we can create. You can, like, you go to a meetup group, that's a little tribe. When you go to work, that's a little tribe. So we just have to sort of, adapt our cave brain. I call cave brain is the brain that we were, on an evolutionary level. We're still at that level in lots of ways.
Yeah.
We have to adapt cave brain to the 21st century, really.
Hi, it's Jessa here, taking just a quick break. Thanks for listening so far. I wanted to let you know about the sex quiz that I've put together called How Healthy is Your Sex Life? I've taken a close look at the typical ways that I see couples get into trouble with sex, including avoidance, neglect, negativity, distraction, and boredom. And the free quiz will score your individual results based on these factors. And then I provide my recommendations and ideas, including my top 10 sex tips, which will help you make instant improvement. If you'd like to take the quiz and see how healthy your sex life is, you can do it right now at sexhealthquiz.com. So when you say you're trying to achieve or are achieving stage 3 on your own, how much is that dependent on other people sort of getting on board, and you're so brave and congratulations and welcome back, or is this something that you think somebody can do totally on their own?
Well, yeah, it's difficult. I don't know if you can. For me, shame was something that was a huge thing I was carrying for years and years. And I've been doing a lot of work in the last few days, last few years, around shedding that shame. And for me, having other people accept you, that's the way that you get rid of shame.
Yeah.
For me, the way I do it, obviously I've got my podcast and listeners, and I get feedback, and it's clients. For me, it is working one-to-one with people, and they say, this is so awful, I'm so awful, and then I help them see it a different way, and then I give them lots of practical tools to help them change their behaviour and feel good about the challenges that they've got. And for me, that's where I feel like I'm in my stage 3. I'm helping someone else, because I'm very, very niche. I'm not the big mainstream dieting things.
Right.
So and maybe it's just where I am in my business, is that I haven't got a massive community. I've got a small Facebook group, and I work one-to-one with clients, and I do group work sometime. But where I am at the moment in my own stage 3 is really, I get that feeling of being, moving into stage 3 through one-to-one work mostly.
One of the things I'm thinking about is with clients and hearing their various trauma stories, and how common it is to go back and confront your abuser or confront the parent that didn't protect you. And I think maybe in this paradigm, you're trying to get stage 3 from people who are maybe not going to give it to you, and because I think we frequently don't get the response we want from those people. Which is acknowledgement and ownership and, apology. So it seems important to keep in mind that, where for people that might be going through this, where is their stage 3 going to come from? Where are the other people that are going to welcome them back and recognize the ordeal, right? And the courage and the growth that came through that. Because it may not be your family, for instance.
Yeah, it may not be your family. And also, I wouldn't even know. I imagine this man is dead. I wouldn't know. For me, and I never had any need to go and seek him out and shout him or whatever. It was finding other people where I could say, this has happened to me.
Yeah.
And be able to use my experience to help them. And that's what it is. I think, yes. So you can't rely on other people. You can't rely on other people to give you your stage 3. You have to organize it yourself. But I don't think it can happen in isolation. You do need some kind of tribe. But there are so many organizations, so many groups. And that's one of the things that is wonderful about this modern so-called tribeless world, which I'm always banging on about, but there are advantages. Yeah.
Right. The connectivity we have across the internet, right, with different groups.
Yeah.
So I guess the lesson here, it seems to me, is, find your tribe, because don't beat your head against the wall going back to the family that won't, deal with this or welcome you back in the way that you need. But find the people where you can get that support and recognition and make a difference. I mean, I love how you've translated this into helping other people.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's really key is being able to find a different way to see your experiences than as a victim. I was fully signed up to the victim club for many, many years, and I realized it wasn't great, but that was the only way I felt significant. And then a coach once said to me, look, your victim identity, Harriet, it's just telling the story. But that's all it can do, is tell the story. So when you look at everything through the lens of stage 3, you tell your story in order to help someone else feel better. And I remember when this happened was, I started to tell people about my experiences, and then they would start talking to me. And this was well before Me Too. And I remember as well the day that I was telling one of my friends about my experience, and she came back to me with her story, and it was utterly, utterly horrendous. I'd never in person heard such an horrendous abuse story. And something happened in me, because previous to that moment, I couldn't bear listening to other people's horror stories, because I was still trying to grapple with my own, and I was fully signed up to the victim identity. And when she started talking, I completely lost any of my sense of self, and I clued into her. And because I have this framework of moving to stage 3, I had somewhere we could take this conversation. And that was an amazing moment. I thought, I can hear this. I can hear these awful things that I wasn't able to before, because I was, looking at it from that stage 3 perspective.
Do you have a label for the role you're in instead of victim? Like, I don't know if you have a word for what you consider yourself.
If I consider myself, well, there's a horrible, horrible tendency for people to think that coaches are going to fix them, and that person changed my life, and we can't fix anybody. Some people say nobody's broken. Some people say everyone's broken, and we're all great like that, So I'll leave that to listeners to work out for themselves. So, no, I don't think I would like to give myself a label in a way, just helping people. I think helping people connect to their power. I don't know, in the stuff I read with that Carla McLaren wrote, she talks about being like the tribal elder. Elder means wise person.
Yeah. So, I mean, the word that kept coming to me is guide, that maybe from being from a victim, which has you trapped and disempowered, to you've been through something now. And
yes, guide is brilliant. Because people have to walk that path on their own, but I can walk along beside them.
Right. It's everybody has their own unique path.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
The other thing that was amazing to me was what happened after my marriage broke up, because with all of this work, I realized that I wasn't married to the right person. And so then I had that about 18 months, and I'm like, no, I don't want to go near any men. And it wasn't a fear thing. I was sort of confused, because by this point, just 2014, I started to do an awful lot of work on myself, and I could see everything I was saying about protective mechanism. And I understood a lot more. And I also understood not to just believe the lies that my fear was telling me. But then in 2016, I think, I started dating again. And it was amazing, because it was like being 17. And I think that it's almost as if in some ways something freezes in you with abuse. Like I was too scared of boys and then men when I was in my teens and my 30s. And it was like it had been unfrozen. And what happened was, it's quite a funny story, is when I was 17, I was part of this, you know, people going to the same sort of alternative music nights and stuff like this. And there was one lad who every girl fancied him. He was just, he would walk in the room and my friend would say, Harriet, he's here. I feel sick. And I'm like, I feel sick. He was so attractive. We felt sick. That could only come out the mouth of a teenage girl.
Yeah, right.
So anyway, so during this time when I was like starting to think I want to start dating, I bumped into him at a music night with one of the bands that we used to follow. So this was like, you know, we're all 45 now. Whatever.
Oh my gosh.
And then I started going out with him, and it was like, because it was totally like being 17. It was like, I'm going out with the town heartthrob, but 30 years later. And, yeah. And so then I was in a relationship with him for a year, and I've been in another relationship, but like amazing, being able to open myself up and, you know, like having amazing sex. And
so the pain is gone.
Yeah, no, and I'm completely the other way now.
Wow.
And I think this is the amazing thing, and it's a very uncomfortable thing. And I thought, shall I talk about this on this interview? But I think I will, and then people can take that one away.
Yeah.
But the fact is that I look at all my friends who, many of them who haven't had any abuse or anything, and you know, sex isn't important to them, and they don't seem to get a lot of pleasure out of it. And then there's me, who had this horrible thing happen, and because basically I suppressed all that side of me,
for
so many years. And by going and it was dark looking at this stuff and realizing what a mess I was in, and having to look at myself and move through stage 3 and everything like that. But by doing that, I've come out to a place where this is such like an amazing, joyous thing for me that I don't see anyone else around me enjoying in the way that I do. So it's a weird thing, and I feel quite uncomfortable saying it, but there you go.
Well, it's a beautiful story to think you've ended up in a whole new land that you didn't know existed. And I guess from my perspective, you know, as a sex therapist, there's a lot of stuff that gets in between us and our birthright of sexual pleasure and connection, and not just abuse and trauma. So there are a lot of reasons people may not be finding enjoyment with their partner. And
I love the way you call it a birthright.
I think of it that way. I mean, yeah.
Brilliant.
So if you wanted listeners to have the takeaway from this, what would you sum up as your advice, or your, the main point you want people to get?
The advice is, yes. The advice is be curious and ask yourself, is there any gift in this horrible experience? And if there's no gift, what can I do with it? Because it's there, it's happened to you, but you can reframe it. I've changed the entire meaning of that thing in my life, and it no longer defines me. I think that's really, really important. Right. And I've used it for good.
Yeah. And it sounds like the way I hear the takeaway is if people can find their stage 3, if they can come back to the tribe and be honored and supported and welcomed in, then the ordeal can be left behind.
Yeah.
I mean, not like you never went through it, but it's going to lose its power.
Yeah. And it's probably going to be a new tribe.
Yeah. Right.
But when you can, if you can be vulnerable without being a victim, that's an incredibly powerful place to be, to say, this happened to me, but I'm not owning it. I've moved through it. And and then what I would love for people to do is to think, there'll be someone there, however awful you feel, there will be someone else who has been through something similar, or like I say, I don't want this comparison of who's had the worst, but someone who is suffering, who is maybe a step behind you, 2 steps behind you. In my training, we learned about this archetype. Carl Jung came up with these archetypes, and one of them was the wounded healer.
Mm-hmm.
And the wounded healer basically says, you don't have to be perfect to help other people.
Right.
And Carla McLaren, it's great. She's got this phrase. She talks about being beautifully scarred. So you've had the trauma and it's there, but it's beautiful. Because it's finished,
Yeah. That's lovely. Did you want to say a word about any particular episode of your podcast?
Yes. I think it's episode 19. I should be a bit more together. It's called Me Too: How to Release Trauma and Put Food Out of the Job It Was Never Meant to Do. It's a very long one. Anyway, but I'll give you the link. You can put that in the show notes. And the podcast is called The Eating Coach.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I'll definitely include the link to that and to the book that you referenced so that people can get to it and not have to hunt around.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and taking the time to do this.
No worries. If it helps even just one person, I'll have done my stage 3 job.
Good.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.